Hello and welcome back, everyone. We're so grateful that you have chosen to join us again and engage with us in these conversations. We're going to talk today a little bit about, what is a leader and how do people define leadership and what does it mean to be a leader? What do you think of a leader when you think of a good leader? What do I think of as a good leader? And just kind of run it from there. So I'll turn it over to you for a minute.
Sounds great. Thank you. Thanks, Cheryl. And yeah, welcome back, everyone. So, where to start? I think I came across this model of 3 levels of leadership a while ago, and I've tried to go back and find where it originated from, and I haven't been able to, but it came to me in the corporate context when I was training on leadership, and it was these levels of leading self, leading others, and leading a business or leading groups or communities, something larger than just individual people. And I love that model because it starts with this concept of everybody is a leader, and it starts with leading yourself. And I think that's really easy to overlook, the importance of recognizing that, hey, in my own life, am I showing up as a leader in all areas of my own life? Am I empowered in all areas of my own life? And am I setting the example that I would be happy with? Am I happy with how I'm showing up? And what can I do more in that space before I look to grab influence outwards? This idea of resonating out.
Yeah, I like that it all starts with me. I think everything we come back to, it all starts with me. And I don't think we think in terms of leading ourselves. And it's important that we understand that concept of what does it mean to lead ourselves? What does it mean to look inward and say, where am I showing up in the world? And how am I showing up in the world? I think we're not very self-aware sometimes, and I don't think that's anybody's fault. I think the world that we live in is just so chaotic that we just don't have time to stop and think about how we're showing up in the world. Or the first thing, I don't know why, but the first thing that came to my mind when you were talking was when I was in high school, I moved to a new town, the beginning of going into high school. Yeah. And I'm not a particularly outgoing person. And I would just literally show up to school about the time the bell would ring, and I would leave as soon as the bell rang at the end of the day, and in between classes, I just went straight from one class to another. At lunch, my uncle lived across the street, so I'd go over to his house for lunch. It was like, I'm good. And somebody said something to me one day. I mean, I enjoyed being a cheerleader, so I tried out for a cheerleader and I won. And I was like, wow, how could I win? How does anybody even know me? And then I got nominated as, I don't know, Christmas ball queen or something along those lines. And I wasn't seeking such a thing. And I was just amazed. I was like, wow, why do these people, I don't see myself clearly the way they see me. And so I started talking to other people and I was just like, tell me about myself.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of a
Yeah.
weird thing, but in high school, that's kind of, secondary school, depending on where you are in the world, we we have a hard time looking inside ourselves and deciding who we are. And so it's helpful for other people to look inside of us and tell us who they think we are. And they're like, you're just a nice person. You just seem to, want to be friends with people, and you go out of your way to be nice. You see people who are, struggling, and I'm like, people notice that you do that kind of stuff, especially in when you're a teenager, nobody notices that kind of stuff. And it just made me realize how important it is to be self-aware and how important it is to show up in the world the way we want to show up, and in a way that hopefully other people will want to be around us. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
It does. Yeah, it does. It does. And I actually think there's not enough of that happening in the world. And I don't think we're actively taught to live from that place either.
Mhm.
So when I work with people in mentoring, a lot of the time they've come across my work because they're at a point in their life where things just don't work anymore for them. They don't make sense. the tools that they were using to cope with life and get through things and achieve and whatever it is that's important to them, they're just not, if they're not working anymore, and they kind of, things stop making sense. And when you're so used to this pace of life where you're constantly going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and also when you're used to being told externally who you are, what you need to do, how you need to show up, what's important, where to invest your time, and all of those things, and all of the outside stuff stops making sense, and you don't know how to go inside and define your own picture of what's important, then there is a bit of a void. And we're not taught those tools of how to go inward and do the self-reflection and figure out who you are and what's important to you, and if you're happy doing what you're doing, and if you're not happy with it, what do you do with it?
Yeah, I think about, in the workplace, especially is, we all have performance reviews, and we do rely a lot on people around us to tell us how to behave and what to do. And, if we get bad scores on our performance review, it's a reflection of, oh, I'm not doing so well in this area or that area, and we try to improve. And then I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that inherently, but I find that the more we try to please others, there's something so empowering about authenticity. It's okay to try to please others, but not when you lose who you are. And a person who has a really good, strong core and knows who they are inside can still kind of adapt to the world around them, because we all have to adapt in our homes, our families, our workplaces. We can't just do anything and everything we want the way we want it. But I don't even know how to explain this. There's authenticity is so important, knowing who
Yeah.
you are at your core. And then when you have that solid foundation, then it's easier to make adaptations that still are true to your authenticity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The people who are magnetic in life, the people who are the most authentic, because they have tapped in at a really deep level to who they are, what's important to them, what they stand for, who they want to show up as. So when they speak, their speaking is from their heart, from their core, from their center. It's not practiced necessarily or rehearsed. It's real and it comes naturally. And that's kind of this concept of, find your genius. Everybody has their own genius. And when you're living your life oriented around that place, that's when you can be truly authentic and you can speak your truth, and people will magnetize towards you. Even if they don't agree with what you're saying, it's because of how much of yourself you're showing up with, right? And I think that's what great leadership is to me. It starts with how much of themselves has a person connected with, because the more of yourself you've been able to meet, the good and the bad, the light and the dark, the shadows and the really awesome stuff about yourself, the more of yourself you've been able to meet and integrate, what that does is it creates this increased capacity to meet others in their wholeness as well, and see them as they are also, and be more accepting of them as they are also, and foster and facilitate an environment where their genius can also come to the fore, because you've connected to that experience within yourself. And there's a balanced perception of everybody has good and bad, everybody has light. It's how do we connect to what is most beneficial and useful for everyone in each and every moment. I think really great leaders can do that for others because they've been able to do that for themselves.
Yeah, I've engaged with a program called Gene Keys recently, and there's 3 different states. There's the shadow, the gift, and then the city. And I won't get into the other 2, but the shadow is just basically, things about yourself that you may not like, or you may wish, characteristics you may wish you didn't have. And, we're taught from the time we're young, oh, if you don't like that, well, then change that about you, become something different. And you read every self-help book out there to try to help you overcome all of these, negative traits that you have either been told you have or you have decided that you have. And he talks about just embracing your shadow. And I'm like, why would I embrace it? I don't like it. I don't want to embrace something I don't like. But as I started to embrace it, it is true. It just kind of, I wouldn't say naturally falls away. That's not exactly the way I would frame it. But it doesn't mean that, it's not something you would hope that would at some point in your life would change. But it seems like the more you resist
Yeah.
or, and you try to fix it, the worse it becomes. Instead
Yeah.
of just going with it and going, hey, this is who I am. And I know, like, I think about in the workplace, that there'll be times where you'll make a mistake. And when you own up to it, everybody's like, okay, everybody makes mistakes, no big deal. But if you try to cover it up or hide or, whatever, then everybody's like, oh, that's not good. And it's not. So I think that seems to be a better way of framing it, is just kind of owning it.
Yeah. So Carl Jung's work is really powerful around this, and a lot of shadow work that people talk about comes from a lot of his body of work. And the shadow is the shadow because it's unseen, and you kind of need the light to reflect on it to be able to see it. And so that light is the people around you, environments around you. When you consider the reflection that you're seeing in your life experiences, not as something outside of you that other people are doing or that the world is doing or that's being done to you. When you start to go, okay, well, where in me is this? Where does this live in me? And what is it telling me about me that I can't see, except for the fact that it has to play out externally so I can see it like a mirror? Just like we can't see certain parts of ourselves, we need a mirror to reflect it back to us. And when you begin to do that work of, okay, it's not something separate to me, it is part of who I am. Also, I am light and dark and shadow and, illuminated. I am all of those things. Then, yeah, you release this tension and resistance, because what the tension and the resistance does is it keeps you stuck in those patterns of behavior. So let's say, for example, you look at someone who you might view as a really angry person. They're just, constantly angry and tense and, behaving in ways that affect you to then become angry as well. And that archetype might come up in different areas of your life through different people and, different faces, but it's the same energy. And what it is there's a stimulus that creates a reaction in you, and then you react, and then you're in this energy loop of behavior. And so that work of self-leadership, of self-discovery, of pausing and finding some space and getting into more of an observational state is going, this keeps happening and it keeps making me feel a way that I don't really like feeling. What if I just for once stopped, didn't react, pulled back a little bit, found some space? So, oh, look, this thing's happening again. And instead of reacting into it and going into it and getting yourself caught up in that loop again, getting some space and going, well, what else could be true? What else could be true? And just getting curious and asking questions, finding enough space to say, what else could be true? What else could be happening here? What's present that I'm not seeing? And that openness, that curiosity, it's, this space of mindfulness gives you the opportunity to see what you haven't seen before. And in that space is where you get to choose differently, to choose different options. Now you've got a bit more of a perspective that allows for more information to come into play, so that when you respond, it is a response and not a reaction. And Viktor Frankl's quote around, between stimulus and response, there's the space to choose. And that's what gives you freedom in life. That's what gives you growth in life. Because when you choose differently, when you physically act differently, when you behave differently, it leads to different outcomes. People want things to change around them or in their life, in what they're experiencing. And instinct is to try and control what's happening out there. But really, when you get enough space to go, I don't like this experience, and maybe I've got a role to play in it. So how can I choose differently? How can I behave differently? How can I show up differently find a different option that will create a different outcome. A different choice will always create a different outcome. And you may not nail it the first time, but then you have this behavior, this pattern, this experience of space, perspective, some breathing space, and choosing differently so that you can do that until you find the path that is more aligned to what you would like to experience.
And I think that's important, what you would like to experience, how would you like to show up? And you also talked about energy. And I do think that when we're centered and when we're, comfortable with who we are and we've embraced our shadows for whatever reason, then we just naturally let off a certain energy that is attractive. You go back to that's what's magnetic. If you think about people in your circle of influence, or even out, work or wherever, why are you attracted to them? Why do you want to be, think about somebody that you want to get to know, somebody that you want to be you think, wow, I want that person to be a part of my life. And what is it about them that draws you to them? And we always think in superficial terms, like, oh, they have a good personality or a good sense of humor. And those are part of it. I'm not saying that's not part of it. But my experience has been that when I find that magnetic pull, it's because that person is a person that's feels good about themselves, and that they, are okay. They're okay living with themselves. When you're okay
Yeah.
living with yourselves, other people may want to live with you.
Yeah. Yes. And, you and I have done a lot of training in corporate environments and leadership training, facilitated it, participated it, and researched it, because that's the space that we operate in. And, what I found really interesting is when you talk about, say, for example, empathy or emotional intelligence, the way that it's traditionally taught is that you need to show empathy to other people because that's how you collaborate, right? And yeah, of course, for sure, that's how you connect with people, when you can understand the experience that they're going through because you've connected to it within yourself. But that part there is the thing that most people miss. The connection comes from, and the attraction and the magnetism comes from the fact that you have gone there within yourself. You have met those parts of yourself, if not the identical part, the energy of, hey, where am I not so great? Like, where am I an angry person? Where am I a distrustful person? Where have I done things that I'm not so happy with about myself? And met yourself at that place and been able to bring that into a place of compassion and loving kindness within yourself, so that you're not showing up to environments and showing people empathy and putting on this like cape of empathy, and trying to connect with people from that place. That's who I am. I've accepted and met enough of myself. Now I've got an increased capacity to meet other people in that way. And that's the difference. And so, I always kind of struggled with teaching empathy or resilience even to people, to say, here's how you make your team more resilient. What worked better for me as a trainer and a facilitator was to take people there themselves, right? So find the anchor of resilience within you. Let's go to an experience in your life that wasn't so great, that you thought you weren't going to make it through, that felt horrible in the moment, and you thought it was going to be the end of the world or the relationship or the job or the financial situation, whatever it is. And go back to that scenario and how did you feel? What got you through it? How did you get through it? What happens on the other end? What did you learn from that experience? Hey, that's resilience. So now you've got that anchored within you. So how do you now take that and create that for other people, rather than saying, this is what resilience looks like. It's being, like this in the face of adversity. It's very mental. It's very academic. It's not embodied. And we're all resilient, we are all empathetic. It's how do you get people to connect to that within themselves, embodied within themselves, so that it's not superficial. They show up with that presence, they show up with that energy, and they're able to guide people as leaders into that experience within themselves.
And I think, as you talk about resilience and empathy, we always think, "Oh, I can be empathetic if I've experienced, I had a loved one die, you had a loved one die. So we can be empathetic because we have that shared experience." And that's true. That, there's a lot to be said for that. But it doesn't really matter if you've had a shared experience. I can't think of a person I've ever met on this planet who hasn't had hard times, who
Mm,
hasn't had come through something difficult in their life, who
mm,
hasn't, and the process of working through that, although it's not exactly the same, the step-by-step process may not be the same, and it may not even be a step-by-step, it may be this circular process or whatever it is. I know you're going through a hard time. I've been through a hard time. And because I know what it feels like to go through a hard time, I can be there with you.
mm.
I'm not necessarily going to say, here's all the great, wonderful things I learned going through this for me. There's something about just simply saying, I'm going to be there with you while you go through
Yes.
this difficult time. You
Yeah.
don't have to have and it's the same thing with resilience, is what works for you to make you a resilient person may not work for me. But let's get to that shared space of what was something you had in your life that was a hard time, and how did you work your way through it?
Mm.
Well, great, we have a shared experience, because I may have experienced something totally different, and I may have used a different process to get me to, the next point where I was more resilient. But identifying that within yourself gives you that confidence to know, oh, I am resilient. Oh, I can trust you, because even though you may not be, ever had a loved one close to you die or whatever, has happened, I can trust you because I know. And I think that
Mm.
trust is so important.
Trust is really important, especially in leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can smell in authenticity when someone is not authentic. You can sense it when people are not showing up as who they really are, and there's this front and there's this facade. And even if you can't name it, and that does break trust. I think when I was in my last role in corporate, trust was the biggest, I guess it was the kind of like the buzzword or the trend at that time, especially for larger organizations. How do you build trust en masse as a leader of, a team or a business? And why is it so important when there isn't trust? What happens that is so detrimental? So I don't know if you want to talk to that at all, Cheryl.
Yeah, that's always an interesting one, because what I found in most leadership programs that I either designed, and having been an independent consultant, you can relate. You're not always allowed to create what you think is the best program. You have to kind of go along with what the organization wants. And there's a lot of politics and things that go into all of that. And that's another one of those shadow experiences that I had to learn the hard way, and still am learning. But at its core, trust is it's authenticity. And that's something I've really struggled to help people understand, is how do you train somebody to be authentic? How do you teach somebody to be authentic? And somebody's going to trust you when they know that you're okay. Think about a parent. A child inherently trusts their parent. Why is it? Because that parent's always there for them and is always going to do something for them. They're a constant, they're a fixture, hopefully, in the child's
Mm,
life. And they provide boundaries. And I think we disregard this. We think, oh, as adults, we don't need that anymore. Well,
mm,
the best boss I ever had was somebody who I trusted, that if I made a mistake, I could go to him and say, hey, I made a mistake. And he's going to go, okay, well, let's fix it. He's not going to rah, 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 and you just cost the company this much money or whatever. And I had made what his boss viewed as a huge mistake one day. And I found it, I think this was probably the most rewarding experience I had in all my years. And it happened right at the end of my career, whatever we want to call it, was there was the big boss, and then there was my boss, and then there was me. And me and my boss were in with the big boss, and he was telling me exactly what he wanted. And I was furiously writing notes, and here's how we're going to build this, and here's how we're going to do this. And I went back and I took all my notes and I organized them and I gave it to him. And I said, is this what you want? And he said, yeah. And he was in a hurry and he left and whatever. And I was like, okay, that's what I'm building. So I went and started to build it and started putting everything together. And I was like, here, do you want me to show you? He's like, no, just go do it. Just go do it. You know, I was like, oh, okay. And as one day it was time to, he was like, okay, I'm ready. Sit down and show me what, you've built. And I showed him and he's like, that is not at all what I wanted. And I was like, oh, and I you have these little cubicles and then you have these little rooms where you go and whatever. I can't remember what those rooms are called, but anyway, I got relegated to my cubicle but I heard my boss talking to the big boss and he stood up for me. He said, I was there. I was there when you told her what you wanted. And she gave you exactly what you asked for. And she gave you multiple opportunities. And I was like, okay, that built more trust because I knew he was kind of on my side, even though there was this huge mistake supposedly that had been made. I knew he had my back. And I think that's kind of what parents do, even if your children make mistakes and sometimes you get mad at them and, react in ways we all as parents wish we wouldn't sometimes. Your child inherently knows that you have their back for the most part. And that builds trust. And I mean, children who are raised in unfortunate circumstances, they don't have that trust because they don't have that parent who has their back. They don't have that parent who's consistent. And my boss was very consistent with me. You think as an adult, you don't need this consistency, but consistency was very helpful because I knew what the expectations were. I knew how to meet those expectations. And when I would do things wrong, because sometimes he asked me to do things I had no idea what I was doing. And I would come back to him and be like, oh, and he's like, no, that's not at all what I wanted, But he was always so good at saying, here's what you did right, here's what you did wrong. And that built trust. And so when I try to explain to people in organizations, like, how do you build trust? That's how you build it. My boss was confident enough and he was, authentic enough that he would go to bat for me at the higher levels. And yet he was still the kind of person I needed to make sure that I was staying on that path. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm rambling.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. It does make sense. It makes a lot of sense. There's so many things that you said in there that are really important. And I want to go back to a lot of them. And I would love to add something as well is what I've found that really great leaders do that builds trust, that is, again, something that's really easily overlooked, is that they have a cause, they have a vision, they have a purpose, and that is clear. And so the loyalty is to the outcome, right? And to get everybody to the outcome in the best possible way. And so because they're so clear on where they stand within themselves and to others as well, they're clear to others as well. What it does is it creates this environment where it's not personal. It's not about you and me. Things that happen, it's not you're a bad person and you made a mistake, or I'm a bad person and I made a mistake. It's we're working towards an outcome and everyone's aligned. So they're very good at aligning people to the outcome, the vision, the mission. And so when something does happen that could potentially break trust, it's not a personal thing. It's a matter of fact that needs to be resolved. It's always this third thing. How do we preserve the integrity of this? What needs to happen? And it might be, even if that person or that situation is not aligned, it's not a personal thing. It's like, hey, we're going here and that's not for you anymore. And that's okay, you know? And it's this balance of it being impersonal, so not personal, because the loyalty is to the cause, and you can trust that no matter what happens, the loyalty is to the cause. They're consistent and they're stable in that. And at the same time, there's enough humanness there to connect to people because they've gone there within themselves. They have the emotional intelligence and the empathy, and they've held themselves in that space of compassion. They've met their light and dark and shadow, so they can see that in others as well. So again, even though it is, their approach is personal to each person, it's not personal. So I think there's this degree of like, you know where they stand, and therefore you can trust them. Even if it's bad news, they're going to give it to you in a way where it makes sense. You know, you can deal with the bad news, or it's not, you know, an ideal outcome, or it's feedback, because they're not attacking you. They're helping you align to what is important. And I think that's what makes a really good leader, because what happens then is that they take you beyond yourself as well, right?
Mhm.
Because they're operating in the future, they're operating towards an ideal. And to get to the ideal, it's not current state, which means that you have to grow, you have to expand, you have to become bigger, you have to be challenged. And so being around really great leaders who can facilitate that makes you grow as a person as well, as a professional, as a person, as a human as well. And I think that's another reason why we gravitate towards really great leaders, and why they're able to increase their spheres of influence as well. Because they're not trying to control anything or anyone else around them. They're operating from, you know, from purpose, and aligning themselves to their purpose, and working with what is within their sphere of influence to, you know, make sure that the outcome is delivered on.
Yeah. So if we take it and we flip the script, because you and I've had these conversations about, you know, bosses that we've had that we liked and bosses we had that we didn't like, or leaders, I should say. And I'm sure we've all worked for someone, or, you know, not even necessarily worked for somebody, but we've all had to interact with somebody that we didn't necessarily trust. And what do you do? What do you do when you are, you know, you're not the person in charge? How do you create an environment conducive to trust when you're not the person who can, I hate to use the word control, you know, the outcome, the project, whatever. And I think as I look back at some of the many experiences I've had where I've been in that situation and the person I was working with was not, you know, I didn't trust them. I didn't trust that they'd have my back. I didn't trust that they liked me as a person. I didn't trust that they, you know, could provide me with the right guidance to get us where we needed to go and have those guardrails and, you know, positive feedback, all of those things. And it took me and it's, you know, I'm not saying I'm good at it to this day, but I think I'm a little better than I am many years ago, was, okay, what can I do? How can I flip that script? And I found that when I made it not personal, just like you said, you know, it's about the project. It's about whatever we're working on. It's about this goal, this objective that we're trying to achieve in whatever, you know, capacity or environment that we're in, is that if they could learn to trust me and I became a person who they could trust,
Mm,
then things changed. And even though I wasn't, quote, the leader in the technical sense, I had a lot more influence over how things went because that person learned to trust me. And I
absolutely.
became a person of, you know, of trust.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my favorite books of all time that I feel like should be on the high school reading list, and every person should have it on their desk or in their back pocket, is
Mhm.
7 Habits of Highly Effective People from Stephen Covey. So he created or popularized this model of spheres of influence, and it's just everything in that book is really relevant. And the spheres of influence model for me comes up so often in speaking to people, because it's a model that helps you understand what you can really control and not control in life. Okay, so there's these 3 spheres of influence, And in the outside sphere are things that are really out of your control and out of your influence. Okay, so that might be world politics, world events, the weather, all of the things that are just beyond your immediate control, the company strategy, if you're not on the executive team, these are out of your control, they're top down, and you don't really have much say in them, but they impact you inwardly. Then you've got the next sphere, which is things that you cannot control, but you may have some influence over. So if we're talking about it from a work context, you can't control the strategy, but you might be able to influence how it's implemented within your division or your team. Or you might be able to influence what is watched within your house if, trying to be conscious of, what type of information comes into your house and your family. So you have influence, but you can't control every single person and guarantee the outcome and the impact. And then right at the center of it is what you can control and what you can influence. And really, if we think about it honestly, the only thing that you can ever really hope to control and influence to any degree is yourself, your thoughts, your attitude, your behaviors, your beliefs, your actions. And if we're honest, even that is really hard for a lot of us, right? Because of this idea of how much of our beliefs are beneath our conscious awareness within our subconscious, and how much of our lives we're just operating from a place of habit, a place of, it's automatic, it's what we've always done. We haven't actually stopped and looked at the reflection, or we haven't stopped and questioned the belief, and we haven't stopped and looked at what our role is in the outcomes that we're creating in our life and what we're experiencing in life. So it starts with getting a real big grasp on, am I aware of my beliefs, my actions, my thoughts? Are they aligned to what I would like to be experiencing? And as you start to get increased mastery of that, what actually happens is that central sphere of influence starts to expand, so that instead of trying to now control everything else around us, I don't like the way that person's speaking, or I don't like this part of the strategy, or I don't like that part of the project plan, or instead of trying to control all of those things outside of us, because we're more present and aware and coherent and can express our ideas more effectively, and we are seeing more of other people, then we naturally start to expand that sphere of control and influence and have more accountability, right? And that's what it's about. We become more accountable. As you become more accountable for yourself and every part of your life, then your capacity to take on more responsibility and more accountability increases, and therefore you have more influence. So instead of, again, this grabbiness and this graspiness outside, you start from the center. You work on being more accountable and more responsible, and then you're able to do outwardly influence more, and more of what seems to be out of your influence falls into your sphere of influence. And so, that idea of, what if I showed up as more responsible? What if I took more accountability? What if I became more empathetic? What if I just became more curious about, why is this stakeholder or client or employee showing up in this way? What am I not seeing? What judgment, what lens is in front of my eyes that I'm perceiving? And if I took that away and just became a bit more open and clear and curious, what else am I going to see that's going to help me get to the outcome, to the best outcome for everyone? And so I think that's why the work of self-discovery is so important, because how else do you build those tools? How else do you build that toolkit of getting space and not being reactionary to everything that is a stimulus in life?
Yeah, I think we live in a very reactionary world. And I think, unfortunately, so much of that does have to do with the fact that we just lead these really chaotic and hectic schedules, which we all need to get under control. But I do think, this whole idea of, starting with yourself. And I don't know if you've ever worked in a place where, I don't know, just random, the receptionist, the lowliest person, I guess you'd say, at an organization, sometimes the person who greets the people who walk in the door or answers the phone or whatever. I don't think we have receptionists anymore. I think I'm too old school. But if you think about, who's the person, have you ever worked somewhere where the person who isn't in the leadership position is the person everybody goes to when they, have a challenge, or, it's like, and if you go back to the receptionist, sometimes because she's the point of contact for so many different places. Whenever anybody wants to know anything, they come to her because she just happens to be the central point of contact. And I think that when we embrace that role of being a leader within ourselves, and once again, kind of back to that idea of energy, and we project that kind of energy, then it is kind of magnetic. And we'll get into this in future discussions. David Hawking, I always want to call him Hawkins. Is it Hawkins or Hawkins? Hawkins. I don't know. I always want to put a K in there. He has a levels of consciousness chart in a book that he wrote called Power versus Force, or Force versus Power. See, Power versus Force. Very deep book, hard to read, but very good book. But he just talks about the different levels of consciousness, and as we reach these higher levels of consciousness, we become, the kind of leader just naturally that attracts people to us. And supposedly at the highest level of consciousness, at the 900 level or whatever, there's only, I wouldn't even say a handful of people throughout the world who've ever done that. And Jesus Christ is the first one that they always mention, even if you don't believe he was, from a religious perspective, your savior. I don't think
historical.
I don't think anybody would disagree with the fact that he was an amazing teacher and a good person and all of those things. And yet look who he was. He was never, one of those Roman centuries, or he wasn't an emperor, and he was never, the leader of a great army or anything. He was just a man. And he lived amongst the lowliest of people, and that's where he chose to live. I mean, that was totally by his choice that he lived there. And then, people like Buddha, and why is my mind gone blank?
Yeah, a lot of the prophets and sages and
Yeah.
mystics.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's because they have learned how to, and like Mother Teresa, I guess, is another one that comes to mind. And they're authentic. They're true to who they are. They know who they are, and they feel good and about who they are, even though they're not perfect, even though they may not, they have plenty of shadows, just like all of us do. They still are okay with themselves. And I think another key element to all of this that we haven't talked about a lot is these people have all been in service to someone else. And I think when we embrace the idea of service, that is another natural, I think trust and service are just two of the most important things that you can have in an organization.
Yes, and this goes back to the idea of great leaders have an ideal that is beyond themselves, that they are moving themselves and others towards. And that is usually something impactful for others. They want to be in service to others, to as many people as possible. And it's not a coincidence that leads to the best financial outcomes as well. There's a direct correlation there between wanting to help people, wanting to actually solve important problems and be of service to the most amount of people. And from an organization's perspective, then, making that financially viable as well. And for me, that's a really important discussion for where we're headed into as well, because I feel as though for a really long time as individuals, we have had to be fragmented to a certain extent. So all these different parts of us, the part of us that is spiritual and the part of us that are material, it's been difficult for those things to coexist. And there's a lot of false or unhelpful beliefs around money and spirituality that seem to sit on opposite ends of some spectrum, when really you can view being in service and helping people as a deeply spiritual existence. And therefore, because you're creating value, know that you are going to be appropriately rewarded and compensated and have equal and fair exchange for that as well. And I think that's where we're moving into for individuals who are, who are in this realm of wanting to increase their consciousness and increase their awareness. Yes, it's really an amazing thing to do for yourself and to show up for others in that way. And it's also okay to want to be rewarded for that work as well, because you are in service. And, you know, whether you do that individually, whether you think about it from a corporate perspective, the more that you are able to impact people through the work that you do, the greater influence you're going to have. So, you know, it's not to say that you should do it for financial reward, but also it's okay to want financial reward. That's a lot of the unhelpful beliefs that I have to help people unwind as well. And I had to unwind for myself as well. You know, I don't think that we're meant to live in scarcity. If you know, I don't buy into a lot of the narratives that are common amongst people who play in this space of spirituality and consciousness. I think that the more resourced people who have the good of all in their heart and in their intention and in their work, the more resourced they are, the better impact they can have on the world. So why wouldn't those people be aspiring to be very well resourced?
Exactly. And I think it's interesting. Money always is or, you know, financial resources, however you want to frame it, is always an interesting discussion. And you and I have developed a lot of leadership programs, like we mentioned, and so many of them are, in my experience anyway, centered around like having better communication and having, you know, a vision. And I'm not saying organizations shouldn't have a vision, or what are they called? Mission statement.
Mission, yeah.
I've been out of that couple of years and I'm like, I forget it already. Yeah. So you have your mission statement and, you know, all that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that's not important, but it's not really, you can be a great communicator and still not hit the mark. So much of what you and I talk about are values.
Mm.
They're not techniques. And that's where I think people have a hard time sometimes, is because they want a step-by-step technique. How can I, you know, give me this sequential, you know, step-by-step process I can follow. And I'm very much that way. And we'll get into that later on in different sessions, but it's hard to say, how do you create trust? How do you build trust? And is it okay to want money? And, you know, so if I go back to another value, and once again, doesn't matter whether you are religious or not, but if you go back to the 10 Commandments, they're just a good list of things to,
Guidelines.
yeah, good guidelines. But one of the ones that comes out to me, the most people overlook, is thou shalt not covet. Most people don't even know what the word covet means.
Mm.
And I found in my life, and I love my dad dearly, he's passed away, but he was always working overtime, chasing money. And it wasn't because my dad was greedy. My dad wanted lots of money so he could help other people. And he did take his money and he did help other people. But he was this constant chase, you know. And I found that in my own life, I was following that in his footsteps, like we have a tendency to do with our parents. But one day I really sat down and figured out, what does this thou shalt not covet thing mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, just not necessarily be okay with what you have. I mean, that's a part of it. But the other part is, why do I want that? Do I want it because everybody else has it? That's coveting. Or do I want it, like I've said many times over, I don't want, you know, this great big mansion. I don't want to live in it because, number one, I don't want to clean the thing. I guess if I had a big mansion, I could hire a maid to clean it,
You
right?
have a cleaner.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm okay living in just a small house, and, I don't need a lot of space. Sometimes I think the tiny house thing is kind of cool. But that aside, you know, so as I've looked at acquiring things in my life, I really sat back and tried to evaluate, why do I want something? Is it because I really want it? What am I going to do with it? Is it going to create value in my life? Or is it just another gadget to, put on my wall and, whatever? I don't know. But
Yeah.
I think, that's where I think if we get back to coveting, if we get out of the mode of coveting things, then I think financial prosperity, all of that just is kind of a natural outgrowth, because we're
Yeah.
not trying to acquire things just for the sake of having them or to compete with somebody else. They're useful to us.
Yeah. Really important thing that you've touched upon. And that concept of contentment and covetingness and a few other concepts that tie into that. You will find them in every religion and philosophy throughout time. And so one of the lenses and maps that I like to use is yogic philosophy. And in yogic philosophy, it's referred to as a few different things, but one of them is grasping and aversion. Okay, so, and the picture that I like to paint for people is grasping and aversion. It's like a pendulum that keeps you swinging between emotions, because when you are coveting, or when you're grasping, or when you are attracted to something, when you want something, when you're coveting it and you want more and more, that's pleasure-seeking behavior. Okay, so you're operating from your lower instinctual nature and you're seeking pleasure. It feels good, so you want more of it, or you think it's going to make you feel good, so you want more of it, and then you want to hold on to it and you become grabby about it. And then on the other side of the pendulum is the aversion. You know, I don't want it. That doesn't feel good. And that's where we're trying to avoid pain. So we're either seeking pleasure or we're avoiding pain. And it's the lower animal instinct nature of us that keeps us swinging between, this feels good, give me more. This doesn't feel good, send it away. I don't want it. I don't like it. Why is it coming at me? And you're in resistance. And so when you're thinking about anything, whether it's money or relationships or anything that you can experience in life, and you're coming at it from this perspective of, I want it because it feels good, I don't want it because it feels bad, you're constantly swinging between these emotional highs and emotional lows, right? Mental highs and mental lows. And, you know, what we're talking about here through the work of self-discovery and learning how to lead yourself, and then finding a cause that's bigger than yourself, and, you know, leading yourself towards that. And then you will naturally have people gravitate towards you because you're in your authenticity, because they see the passion that you have for it. They will come towards you because they will align to that energy as well. And they will be brought outside of themselves and have that experience for themselves. It's getting off the pendulum swing and tapping into your higher nature of your ideals. What would I like to experience? You know, what would be really meaningful and impactful? What could create a legacy? You know, what is transcendent beyond me that will help me self-actualize and figure out more of who I am? And then you're on this like ascension path, or this vertical path. And so even if these experiences happen down here, where you're going from, I don't want to experience it because it feels bad, pain, go away, or I want to experience it because it feels good, you're not going to jump on the pendulum swing and have these highs and lows. You're just going to be in a state where, okay, that happened, felt good, I can see it, I can enjoy it, I can recognize it without craving more of it. I can just be with it and then let it go, because it is going to go. It's not going to last forever. And then on the flip side, hey, I'm in a tough time. This is sticky. This is challenging. This doesn't feel great, but I can also be with that and observe that, knowing that's also going to go. And Alan Watts calls it happenings. Life is just like all these happenings. They're all happening, but you're in the middle way on your ascension path, aligned to your ideals and your high vision and your mission. And you're not swinging on the pendulum that's going to get you off track from that. And so, you know, I think that's a really important part of being able to lead yourself when you do this work of self-discovery, is figuring out what is that path for you, what are your ideals, what are your values, and showing up as that and using that as your compass to make decisions in life. And that in itself builds trust, because that is consistent behavior. People can expect that you are going to move in line with that thing. You know, they may not like it, but they can trust that you're going to be consistent. They may not agree with it, but they can trust that you're going to be consistent. You're not going to waver and sway based on what's happening or these happenings around you. That builds trust.
Yes, because you have values. And I don't think I've ever built up until now, and I'll elaborate on a little bit on that in a minute, a leadership program that really talks about values. They talk about techniques. They talk about ideas. They talk about, you know, soft skills and those kind of things. And I'm not saying those aren't important. I don't want to discount those. But when you look at all of these kind of esoteric ideas or religious ideas or spiritual ideas, or, you know, however, you know, you want to frame them, they're all based on values. And a person who is consistent in their values is going to be a person that naturally attracts other people. And
Yeah.
that's one of, you know, Meltem and I've had this discussion as I'm trying to build a leadership course, a conscious leadership course, and we'll get into a little bit more about what she does in a future. And she's actually agreed to do a little session with me. So I'm kind of excited about that. I've already had one session with her and it was wonderful and it was very enlightening. So I'm very excited to do another one. But as I'm building this conscious leadership program, I'm like, oh, how do I teach people values? I mean, if you're a religious person, you go to church every week and you hear the preacher get up there and talk about, what values you should have and maybe give you some few tips here and there, or, go to different programs, maybe yoga or meditation programs or whatever. And there's a certain amount of technique involved in all of that, but it's still pretty esoteric. And I'm coming up with more ideas and I'm excited about some of them. But I think most of it goes back to what, Meltem said at the beginning, is just meeting people where they are. And when you meet people where they are, then it happens.
Yeah, it does. It does. It does. And there's a really incredible researcher, author, thinker, strategist, consultant that I have, whose work I love, is Jim Collins. So some of his work includes Good to Great. That's one of the books that he's written. Beyond Entrepreneurship, and then Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0. These are like staples, especially in the tech space, in terms of how to build really great businesses. And his work is so incredibly well researched. And in the introduction of Good to Great, what he talks about is that, so the premise of that work, Good to Great, is that they wanted to identify who were the companies at that point in time who had made the biggest transformations from just good companies, well performing, to really outstanding, great market leaders, best returns for investors, really big impact in the world, that had very clear metrics. So what is a great company and who are these great companies and how did they make that transformation from good to great? And they did an incredibly huge amount of research around this. And it's interesting to me what he says in the introduction, in that they were not looking for a strategy, they were not looking for tactics. What they came up with is a set of principles. And these principles were based in reality with evidence from all of the research that they did on these organizations. And they took lots of different data points, qualitative and quantitative data. So, actual metrics and performance, as well as a stack of interviews with employees and leaders from these organizations, to come up with just this, these principles that they came up with. And the principles, yes, they were on what has helped these organizations transform from good to great. But more importantly, they were principles of excellence. He realized they were actually principles on excellence. How do we do something in an excellent fashion, to the best way that we could possibly do it, and just create this experience of excellence? And that transcends business. That's also personal development. The principles in that book are not just for business. The principles in that book is also relevant to us as human beings. How do we identify and polish our own excellence and brilliance within us, so that we're showing up? And that's really the quest, right? It's to be the best that we can be and offer the most that we can, and realize what is our potential and who can I be. And I think that's where people get caught up, and organizations and leaders get caught up in tactics and strategy. That if you're looking outside of yourself for the answer on what has everybody else done that's led to their success or that's led to their excellence, you might get clues, but it's never going to be the same roadmap. You have to go in to find out what is unique to me. And that's even in the model that they came up with. It's called the hedgehog model. It's phenomenal. It talks about 3 concepts in the hedgehog model. What drives our economic engine? What can we do better than anybody else in the world? And the third circle in the hedgehog has just escaped me. But that's, the core of it is this, all the decision making that these organizations made, and that the leaders brought every conversation back to, is what is it that we can do better than anybody else in the world? And therefore, when you come from that place, the question is not what do I need to do or what do I need to have? It's who do we need to become? Who do we need to be? And that's the core of it. And then, you know, when you operate from that place, there is no competition, because you're being the most authentic expression of who you are as an individual or a family or a group or a community or an organization. You know, there's no competition and there's no roadmap. but there are principles of excellence, you know.
Yes.
And there's many different frameworks that you can go to for those, like, you know, different references, whether it's business material, whether it's personal development material, whether it's religion, whether it's philosophy. And, you know, ultimately they all sort of skirt around the same sort of principles. And the core question is, who do I need to be? Who do I need to become? And I think that's a really big question that not many people are used to asking. It's more like, what do I need to do?
It's funny, and we've come full circle here, so this is be a good ending point, but I put together a course on resilience, and one section of it was literally, it had a picture of a boy and, you know, split down the middle. And on this side is, what do I want to be? And the other side was, who do I want to be? And the whole program was centered around, who do I want to be? Because you can become anything. That's the technique. That's, you know, if I want to be a fireman, I have to go learn all the things about, you know, being a fireman. But over here, this is a whole different, and we don't. I think that's something we've gotten away from in our world a lot. And we need to get back to, I think, and a lot of that's going to come back to, you know, making the time and to really sit with yourself and be more reflective on those things. But
yeah, and to go into your internal landscape, because who do you want to be is a reflection of what are your beliefs. That's the tie-in. It's not about action first. It's about going all the way into your mental constructs and your concept of yourself and the world and others and how things should be, and going, what are my beliefs that are driving my behaviors and decision making, that's creating the actions, that's leading to the results and outcomes that I'm experiencing. So who do I need to be is, well, how does that person think, feel, do? It's going all the way back.
it is. And the Japanese, using a Suzuki, if you're not familiar with it, it's a method for teaching music that the Japanese use. And my mom was a piano teacher, and she always used to say this. She says, always leave people wanting more. So I think we'll end on this note, and we'll hope that you want more, that we've left you with just enough that you want to come back for more.
Amazing. That was a great conversation. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Hopefully, yes, there was some useful stuff and helpful and insightful things for people to do some self-reflection on, and come back to us next week.
We'd love to have you join the conversation.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, until next time, have a great week. Yes, do drop your comments and thoughts in the comments section. We would love to have your opinions on anything that we've discussed. And yeah, we'll see you next time.